G'day there guys, weird social experiment today. Check if that subscribe button is clicked. Do it right now. It's your main man Markee and welcome back to another episode of r/AmiTheA. Now if you love today's bloody good episodes, I want you to smack that subscribe button down south. Have a bloody good time and enjoy the stories today. Thank you. Posted by user AITA4599909. Titled, Am I the a-hole for kicking my friend out of my house after what she did? So my, male 36, wife passed away 2 years ago. I have an 11-year-old son named Sean. I'm doing okay with money. I have a stable income and support system. I have a friend named Kate, and we've been together since we were kids. She's like a sister to me, although she tends to boss me around. She's introduced me to her female friends, hoping that I'll settle down again. I told her that I have other priorities, and I'm required to focus on Sean and his health. He has diabetes. Kate thinks there's something wrong with me, but not everyone's circumstances are the same. I started noticing a pattern in her behavior after she introduced me to a friend of hers. She'd tell me to leave Sean at home when we hang out and meet her friends. She'd tell me to take down any pictures that have my son and wife in it, because ladies will assume that I'm a single dad, or still married, and that'd limit my chances in dating. I told her to knock it off, and she said that she was looking out for my social life, saying I'm ruining it and exhausting myself. I stopped talking to her for days. Then I decided to let it go. She's been insisting on bringing her friend to visit me with other friends. I agreed to have them as guests. Kate suggested I take Sean to stay with a relative, since it'll be adult dinner, but I refused. He was comfortable in his home and didn't want to go. Kate was at my place before her friends arrived. I checked on Sean and told him to tell me if he needed anything before he went to sleep. At 12:30, I was sitting and just starting to chat with Kate's friend while Kate kept blinking at me with a smirk on her face. I got a text message from Sean telling me he wanted to use the bathroom, but the door handle was stuck and he couldn't open the door. I went upstairs to check, and Kate followed me. I found that the door was actually locked. I was confused, and I asked Sean, and he said he didn't lock it. I started looking for the key, and that's when Kate quietly handed it to me, saying she took it. I was stunned. I opened the door for Sean, then I asked her why she locked the door, and she said that she lied to her friend about me not having kids and didn't want her to see Sean. She said it was no big deal since he was sleeping, but I was furious. I started yelling at her as she kept shushing me. Everyone started leaving after I yelled at Kate and cussed her out for doing this. She blew up after her friend left and said I was an idiot because most people don't mention kids until after months into dating, and that I didn't deserve her help to move on when she thought I was a decent, sane person. I called her stupid and told her to get out of my house. She told me to wallow in my misery and left. Then her friends kept blaming me for making a scene and treating Kate like that, especially since she cooked dinner and helped a lot. What kind of dimension are we living here that the friends support these kind of attitudes? That's just absolute insanity to me to think about. Saying you have kids is something you bring up from the get-go. It's not something you spring on a partner months into dating. I thought I've read enough r/relationship advice posts to make that obvious to people. The fact that she thought he had to deserve her help, and that he didn't deserve her help, and that she thought he was a sane person. Oh my god. I genuinely can't deal with this person. She's madder than a clown car. OP, you are not wallowing in your own misery. You're trying to move on and get into the dating scene, and it's perfectly okay to be a single parent, even though that does make it harder to, date. But we do see plenty of examples of people dating successfully, even while they're a single parent. Hiding that fact only makes things worse for you, and worse for your partner because it's going to blow up in your face. You're not the a-hole for kicking your friend out of your house after what she did. There is no reason for her to have done what she did. She's a toxic person surrounded by a toxic pool of friends. You're in the right here, not the a-hole. In the comments, Esther Byrne says, "What the actual hell? Not the a-hole, and you won't find anyone saying otherwise. Who locks a kid inside a room, and behind their parents' back too? You need to cut off Kate completely. She doesn't understand, no. Wants you to pretend your son doesn't exist, and is spewing off lies about dating etiquette. You absolutely need to disclose if you have children or not from the beginning. She told me to wallow in my misery and left. No friend says that. She's the miserable one. Focus on yourself and your kid and do whatever is best and comfortable for both of you. Not the a-hole. She basically wanted you to pull a bait and switch on any prospective partners, and we all know that's an a-hole thing to do. These girls are supposed to be friends of hers too, lol? I can't imagine how that worked out in her head. I mean, that part worked out well enough for her since apparently they are mad at OP too. They haven't got the full story. They have a Kate version, none of which includes locking a diabetic child in his room. This is super dangerous. Hypothetical fires are one thing, but severe hypoglycemia for a young diabetic locked in a room without help or access to carbohydrates is a real dangerous thing. Bossy goth girl Uwu says, not the a-hole. I'm sorry for your loss. What Kate did is inexcusable. She literally locked your child in their room, in their own home, in a bid for control. Absolutely not. You need to burn the whole damn apron, not just cut the strings. What if there had been a fire? Cut Kate out of your life for good. Endangering your child's welfare is not a way to help you or move on from your wife's untimely passing. Posted by user Throwaway Harbo. Titled, Am I the a-hole for still attending a wedding after my wife's miscarriage? So my wife miscarried our baby a week ago. She is absolutely besides herself. I was very upset as well, but at the same time, I know that it was obviously not meant to be, especially when it happened so early into the pregnancy before anybody could really form an attachment. My dad is kind of a character in my family. In our entire extended family, everyone else is of average or slightly below average income, while my dad got lucky when he was in his 30s and has made a lot of money. He's 67 right now. Him and my mum divorced when they were both 35, and he's been with my stepmother, 49 female, for 20 years before they divorced 2 years ago. Around Christmas, my wife and I got an invitation to his wedding ceremony with his new fiancée, who is 25 and pregnant. My wife initially didn't want to go, and was very against it. She had become close to my stepmother and my half-siblings from my stepmother, and said she thinks my dad is trash. I was able to convince her to, reluctantly, agree to attending, because the ceremony was only 20 people in total, and my dad would definitely feel it even if one person didn't attend. Before the holidays, I was told my hours at work would be cut. My dad doesn't usually give handouts, but he's offered to help me out, and has sent me money even though I didn't explicitly ask. After my wife miscarried, and I brought up the wedding, she said she wasn't going to drive 4 hours to see my dad, and that she once again only feels bad for my ex-stepmother, who has reached out to offer her condolences, while my dad hasn't. I ask if she still feels sick, and she's insisted she's physically okay, but is never going to get over it. So I kept asking why she didn't feel well enough to attend the wedding, and she said because she wants to be alone with just her and me, and just be in each other's companies. She begged me not to leave her for the weekend. I intended to stay at my dad's house. I finally get annoyed because I felt like she was talking about the baby as if it was still here, and told her that the baby would never be a living entity, and burying herself in covers wouldn't make it any better. I ended up packing up my stuff and attending my dad's wedding. Am I the a-hole? My wife and I had a phone conversation right after the wedding ceremony where she accused me of doing it for my dad's financial support and said she'd take on personal debt before she accepts money from my dad. OP has offered the following explanation for why they think they might be the a-hole. I might be the a-hole for closing the door on our baby so quickly and carrying on as if I didn't care that the baby was gone by doing all the things I already planned to do. Fairly succinctly, yeah, you're an a-hole for that. You suck for doing that. Yes, the baby isn't a physical entity, and it won't be a physical entity, but you are the a-hole for closing the door on that baby so quickly. It means something to your wife, and it should mean something to you, and her prolonged suffering and mental anguish over having a miscarriage is valid, and you don't recognize that, and you refuse to comfort her in her time of need. This is kind of destroying your wedding vows that you have to each other, and it seems as though you care about your father with his sugar baby that he's marrying than you do about your own relationships. And that's just really sad. And I feel for people in real life that have this happen to them, and they don't have support networks to reach out to, and all they want is their partner there to comfort them while they're dealing with loss and grief. And yet these people decide to, once again, as is mentioned a lot on these Am I the A-hole, travel during a pandemic. This seems unnecessary, and you had every reason not to go to that wedding, yet you still did it, and you are such an a-hole for it. Shame on you, OP, you are the a-hole. Redoubtable South says that the baby would never be a living entity, and burying herself in the covers wouldn't make it any better. Jesus Christ! Do you seriously have to ask if you were an a-hole? You are worse than an a-hole. You are heartless and cruel to your wife. You're the a-hole. Exactly this. I can't think of a better way of wording it than this. OP is honestly the most disgusting poster I've ever seen for a long while. I literally don't see how his wife could move past this and continue on with this marriage. There is no way. I was just going to say the same. I give it 6 months or less before he's being served divorce papers. And let's also look at OP's father, who he describes as a character who has knocked up a young woman in her 20s when he's 40 years her senior. Is it little wonder why OP is so disgusting with a revolting, dirty old man for a father? OP's wife should get as far away from that trashy family as possible. Apple falling right next to that tree, right? It was rotten and it just rotted off that tree. You're the a-hole. Not so much for wanting to go to the wedding, but, quote, I felt like she was talking about the baby as if it was still here and told her that the baby would never be a living entity and burying herself in covers wouldn't make it any better, end quote. Dude, the mere fact that you're calling it a baby means that you don't get to sweep this loss under the rug and demand that everything go back to normal on a schedule that's convenient for you. Your wife is hurting. Physically. Even if she wasn't very far along and didn't need more than a checkup, pregnancy hormones don't go away immediately just because there's no longer a pregnancy. Mentally and emotionally hurting too. You don't have to just stand there and nod your head if she wants to badmouth your dad, but you need to do a way better job of supporting her through the grieving process. I'm blown away by OP's callousness. Years ago, I had an abortion of a not planned, not wanted pregnancy. It was one of the best decisions of my life, and I have always been vehemently pro-choice, but actually making that decision was incredibly difficult and heartbreaking. This poor woman miscarried a wanted pregnancy a week ago, and her husband is acting like it's no big deal, and she's unreasonable for being devastated? Hopefully his wife can move on and find someone with an ounce of empathy to have a child with, and look back and thank her lucky stars she's not tied to this guy forever. And Apprehensive Fan 250 says, does she still feel sick? Too soon to form an attachment? For this? You're the a-hole. An unwashed one at that, if you're dense enough to think a week later it's all hunky-dory and all's well that ends well. First, the hormonal upheaval after a miscarriage is not fun. Second, the emotional upheaval is also awful, and it's only been a week? I get probably feeling the need to show up for your dad, but to act why you can't figure out why she doesn't want to, or feel up to going, oh boy. The time frame is what's catching me too. She miscarried a week ago, and the wedding was this weekend. So less than a week into your wife's grieving process, you ditch her for the weekend when she begs you to stay because you're more worried about it being too noticeable that you're not attending a wedding? What the ever-loving F was this heartless a-hole thinking? Posted by user AmiTheA1000. Titled, Am I the a-hole for leaving my therapist a bad review without talking to them about it first? I decided to get a therapist after 3 years without one. I found him on a list of insurance-approved psychologists. I got this list directly from my insurance provider, and they clearly stated my appointments would be completely covered other than a $10 fee. Okay, sounds great. I should also mention these are done online through a service just like Zoom. I cannot join the session until he starts it. The first 2 sessions were good. I really liked him and thought he understood me well. I submitted all of my paperwork to a secretary who handled billing, and she got all my insurance info and informed me that I was all good to go. For the session that happened last week, he joined the session 13 minutes late with no apology at all. My sessions are supposed to be 60 minutes. I expected my session to be 47 minutes long then, as I didn't expect him to make the next client late. However, he hit me with the, okay, well let's wrap up and schedule your next appointment, after we'd been on the call for 35 minutes. I didn't really say anything, as he abruptly left. This made me upset because I'm supposed to get an hour. He dipped in late and then dipped out early. The next day, I received a bill in the mail for $350, and it said I owed because no insurance info was provided. I called a secretary, and she said she misplaced my paperwork. I had sent her an email. How do you misplace an email? I told her I would most definitely not be paying a cent other than my copay that I had already paid. She tried to argue with me and say it wasn't her fault. I told her that if she can't even keep track of confidential info, such as a patient's insurance info, that was a major problem. She assured me she would fix it, and I told her to please take care of it. I didn't snap, I didn't yell. She called me back, giving me all kinds of excuses, saying it was a mistake, and okay, fine, whatever, mistakes happen. But then she said I still needed to pay the bill, and couldn't tell me why. She asked me if I wanted to schedule an appointment, and I told her I would call back later. I didn't, and instead I went on his reviews page and gave him 2 stars with the simple explanation of, came in late, left early with no explanation, reception lost insurance info, and wants me to pay in full. I didn't put feelings or bias into it. That is strictly what happened. Well, he called me a few hours later with an attitude, asking me why I didn't just address my concerns with him. I told him if he had a genuine excuse for coming late or leaving early, he would have either cancelled my appointment or at least apologized and said something. He wants a chance to fix the mistakes if I take down the review, but I told him no thank you. Am I the a-hole? It's not a relationship that you need to give chances to in this one. He's a professional, and he was there to do a job, and he didn't do his job. You don't get second chances in these situations, and he deserves that negative review. You owe him nothing. He owes you the job that was promised and the write-off of the money from your insurance that was promised. He failed to deliver, he insulted you, he didn't help, and now he's making it worse by asking you for money that was agreed upon the insurance would cover beforehand. This all seems very fishy to me, and I hope you can figure it out, but from what I can gather, not the a-hole. In the comments, StrangerFish2 says, not the a-hole, and the insurance bit almost sounds like it could be a scam. If you don't pay, just make sure you actually write a formal letter to your insurance company disputing the claim. Attach the email with the timestamp as well as that list your insurance provider gave you, indicating he accepts your plan. I say this because, if you're in the US, medical debt that gets sent to collections can actually show up on deep dive credit reports, like those run to buy a house or car. It can affect your score for years, contrary to popular belief. Screw deep dive credit checks. I was mistakenly sent to collections for medical debt, and it showed up on my Credit Karma. Tanked my score 100 points off the bat, then 80 after a couple of weeks. Overall, I think it took nearly 6 months to get off my Credit Karma, and I am sure it will show up on deep dive checks, so I saved the paperwork showing that it was a mistake. Not the a-hole also seems like he's more concerned with a bad review than his own poor performance. Also, don't give a late therapist a second chance, especially if they don't acknowledge it. I went to a therapist for abandonment issues who proceeded to be late for, miss, or last-minute cancel 4 sessions over the course of 5 months. I should have raised holy hell the first time, but I said it was alright, and that's presumably where she got the idea that she could keep doing it, not the a-hole. I think OP should contact patient relations at her insurance company via email and send them what she posted in a review. He shouldn't be a preferred provider if that's how he treats clients. Not the a-hole. He was very unprofessional. The receptionist misplacing paperwork was just the cherry on the cake. I do agree that you probably should have spoken to him first regarding the charges, but given his attitude and rudeness, I would have been just as frustrated and angry. As for the receptionist insisting you pay the bill without saying why, that's pretty shady. I disagree. The therapist knew he was late to the appointment and that he left early. It was on him, as the professional getting paid, to apologize and make amends. Unless this was some sort of therapeutic exercise, where OP was supposed to assert themselves directly to the person causing the issue? I don't know. A therapist should never do a therapeutic exercise like this without prior warning or consent. Also, it's usually better to start with more outlandish things that are easier to say no to, and especially not something pertaining to the session itself, where the patient needs to feel safe with their therapist. For example, when I first started doing exercises about asserting myself, my therapist started us off by saying, "I'm going to ask you to wash my car, and you're going to say no, okay?" It may sound silly, and it sure felt silly, but a lot of first steps in therapy feel silly, and that's by design. You can't just jump into the deep end of the pool if you don't know how to swim. You have to start by practicing your strokes in the shallow end, or even outside of the pool entirely. A good therapist won't push you into the deep end with no warning and expect you to know what to do. Posted by user Saruman the Grey. Titled, "Am I the a-hole for building a fence around my backyard and keeping it despite my neighbor's protests?" So I live on the outskirts of a big town/small city, making me one of the few people with a big yard. I live on the top of a little hill, and my yard is really big, and runs all the way to a small wooded area. And then the field next to it is also mine. It pretty much cuts my neighbor's yard off. Think like an upside-down L-shaped yard. One of the major draws of the area I live in is its lovely views. It was also a big part of why I chose to live here. Most of my neighbors have no fences. Before the pandemic, I was only really home in the evening and weekends. The pandemic has forced me to work at home pretty much all the time. I only have to come to the office once a week at most. As a result, I've started making a lot more use of, well, my house, lol. This includes the yard. I got a back porch and I've noticed that I love sitting outside with my work laptop and a cup of coffee, so that's what I've been doing. The problem is, because I was not home much, I barely do any gardening aside from cutting the grass, which means my yard, especially the portion at the back with the turn, is a perfect soccer field for the neighbors' kids. Especially my neighbors' kids are using it pretty much all the time. I even caught them dragging a goalpost into it. I went to talk to the neighbors, as I'm not happy with random people using my yard, and even less happy about not being able to work because of a horde of screaming kids in my yard, even if it isn't fenced. But I was met with the whole, "Kids will be kids. They don't have anything else to do for fun right now. Don't worry, you're not using it anyways." I told them I did not want them to use it regardless. But as you can guess by me writing this post, the kids kept using it. So I put up a big wooden fence, the pre-assembled ones, where you just got to put in the posts and drill in the big wooden panels. It was quite a lot of work, while only being able to ask 2 friends for help, but after a few days, I was done. My neighbors kept coming out to complain, begging me to remove it, etc., claiming they now didn't even have a view. I figured they were overreacting, but now that I'm done, their yard is literally tiny, and their view went from a beautiful hilly landscape with woods to the top of a wooden screen. Meanwhile, my view is still the same. Their kids have since come over to ask to play in my yard, as have a ton of other neighborhood kids, as have their parents, who are angry their kids now have nowhere safe to play, and I'm starting to feel crappy. This is one of those really jumbled situations where it's kind of like who's going to pull the trigger first, but the only people holding a gun in this situation is you. And by people I mean persons, because it's you in this situation. Maybe they have a non-existent gun because if they get hurt on your property, then they could fire some bullets at you and you'd be liable for damage. But I digress. I think a lot of people in this situation wouldn't put the fence up and they'd just continue to allow the kids to play in their yards while they themselves retreat inside to work. But legally and morally, I think it was the best thing to do to put that up, even though it screws your neighbors over. You have to look after yourself at the end of the day, and you owe these people nothing. They can absolutely get hurt on your property, they can damage your property. It's better to mitigate that risk as much as possible. I think that's the morally right thing to do. Maybe they're upset at you, yes. Their upset is founded, it's also not founded at the same time. I can understand where they're coming from, but you have the power in this situation, and again, you do have to look after yourself. So I'm going with not the a-hole. In the comments, HappyPanda2400 says, not the a-hole, and depending on where you live, you might be liable if someone gets hurt on your property. Not sure if I would be, as I never gave anyone permission to use it. But if I would be, that just gives me another reason. In many cases, you could still be liable, even though you've never ever given permission. Plus, even if you aren't liable, that doesn't mean that someone won't try to sue you, which is a headache, win or lose. In many jurisdictions, you'd essentially be giving constructive permission by being aware of the problems, yet not asserting your rights. Sometimes it's even possible to unintentionally create an easement, especially if it can be reasonably expected you knew the land was being used for public purposes. In my state, you'd be liable even if you didn't give permission. Smart move installing the fence. That is not a lesson one wants to learn the hard way. Not the a-hole. Your neighbors are acting like you're obligated for your yard to be a public park. Plus, they were obnoxious about it. Put up whatever kind of fence is allowed by country code. While I think OP should have absolutely fenced off their yard, I think it's going to be hard for OP to live there after also removing everyone's view. I suspect OP is going to be forced out soon. Sometimes being within your rights doesn't mean you aren't being a bad neighbor. This problem could very well have been solved with a simple see-through fence. They removed one person's view. The rest of the neighbors were just letting their kids play in OP's yard. OP gave them an opportunity to come to some kind of resolution. They refused and allowed their kids to keep using OP's property as their play area. They are the ones being bad neighbors, and OP is entitled to put whatever kind of fence they want in their yard. The neighbors should have taken this into consideration before disregarding OP. Yeah. The culture of the place is different than how OP wanted to live. No one else has fences. They all let each other wander around. That is their open and community feel that they all enjoyed. Now OP does not have to like or do that. OP does not have to share. You never have to. But given that that was the culture of the place and what everyone else there considers normal, they likely aren't going to like OP for being the one person who wants a more individualistic approach and who blocked off views with a giant fence that cuts through the place, making things look different for everyone. OP may not be driven out, but they're unlikely to be popular. Some people legitimately don't mind, or even like the neighborhood kids running around free through all the grass. I would be cool with it, just based off how I was raised. I know not everyone feels the same, and I don't hate OP for that, but I suspect that since OP living there has made the neighbors feel less good to everyone else from their point of view, they aren't going to be too happy, whether or not you consider those feelings fair, which I think is cultural. I'm seeing a lot of very capitalist and individualistic, this is mine and I don't have to share, cultural views here. Except, this is not true. OP didn't want a fence, and if they did, I imagine it would have been installed earlier than this. What they wanted was to be able to work from their backyard without kids playing and screaming on their property. OP went to the neighbors to try to work something out, and they refused to engage. The fence is the consequence of that. Being 100% open to whatever is not the only way to share. It seems OP was still willing to share, but needed to make new arrangements due to the pandemic. If it was integral to what the community wanted for access to OP's backyard not to be restricted, then maybe they should have talked to him. And Projectile says, not the a-hole. You asked them nicely to not have their children play there, as it was affecting your ability to get work done. They ignored your request, and their children continued to use your private property and disrupt your workday. To add, depending on where you live, if one of them got hurt on your property, you may be liable for some of their injuries. You put a fence up around your private property as a result of their unwillingness to cooperate. Perhaps you could have reached a middle ground where they could use it outside of working hours and on your days off, but they basically told you to go pound sand when you said you didn't want them there. Now, their reduced view and lack of any flexibility on your part is their own fault. I would make sure you check with your local building code office and make sure the fence is allowed, that the appropriate permits are pulled and approved if required, and that all of the fence sits in the property line and doesn't block any easements that would give the neighbors a legal means to force you to remove the fence. G'day there guys, and that's the end of today's episode. I do hope you enjoyed it and were entertained by today's bloody good content. As always, I want to do a quick shout out and a thank you to all my channel members and Patreon subscribers. Your beautiful faces and names will be up on screen right now. Haven't forgot about you guys, sorry I was taking a little break there. So yeah, if you see yourself, give yourself a pat on the back. If you want to be on this screen, there's links down to the description below where you can sign up and help support the channel and all future projects that I'm going to be doing on this one. With all that said, I hope you guys have an amazing day, night, sleep, whatever you're up to. I'll see you in the next episode, and I do hope you enjoy it. Thank you.